Hello and welcome back to the workshop, and welcome back to the Great Guitar Build-Off 2021. Now, I lied a little bit in the end of the last episode. I said we were going to start working on inlays, and whereas it wasn't a complete lie, I was looking at what I was doing here and I realized there was something that I wanted to add before we got into it. But I did do a couple things as well while I was at it so that we could get ready for doing this part of it. Now, while I was off camera, I went ahead and did a trial run. So I got this little scrap inlaid here. This is kind of the idea that I'm going to do with the fretboard, but I'm going to mimic this on the other side. So it's going to be one complete continuous square. And then they're going to meet in the middle with a little bit of a separation. And that's going to be my inlay design. As you can see, it turned out pretty well. I got this gold wire here. The problem with this gold wire is it's not actual gold, it's actually aluminum that's plated. Real gold wire is horribly expensive. So I found that if I can go ahead and route these channels deep enough and then flood it, that I can keep that gold color in there. The problem is that there is a balance between too deep of a hole and too shallow of a hole. See, I've got the router dialed in to the perfect height to do these with. The only problem is I got to looking at my neck, and whereas this is perfectly aligned with the edge of my tuning keys, I think that I want to do a veneer on the headstock. So this veneer is going to allow me to do two things. The first thing is it's going to add some coloration and a little bit of thickness to the headstock. Being that my tuning keys are on the side of the headstock, the added width is not really going to affect where the strings fall. I am going to have to carve away at the added width where the strings break from the nut in order to make sure there's enough clearance for the strings. But that's really the only hang up that that's going to give. But what it's going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to take this gold wire and also inlay it into the headstock so that I can have a nice continuous design all the way through, because I was actually going to use the same gold wire to act as a faux binding around the body. I got some 2mm thick one for the body, and I've got this 1mm to run around the inlays because it's nice and thin and it's going to be easy to bend into shape and put in the tight corners of these inlays. So I've already gone ahead and milled up my body pieces. So I just took some offcuts from those side pieces and I've milled them down to act as my headstock veneer. So the way that I'm going to achieve this is I've gone ahead and I've cut them into two halves and I've book matched the pieces. So I've gone ahead and I've chamfered these edges and beveled them so that they line up together. And I've cut the angle here at where the fretboard meets the headstock. So now all I really got to do is mark out where my headstock is so I can cut off the excess so that I'm not having too much during glue up, and I can also see where the recessed part on the inside is. I'm obviously going to cut very proud of the lines so that I have enough to mill down after I get it glued up, which is usually why you do this beforehand so that you don't run into the same problem that I just did. But say la vie, it'll have the same effect regardless. So what I want to do is I want to get a couple clamps, clamp it in place, and then I'm going to draw the outline and run it to my bandsaw and trim off all the excess. Now, like I said, they're roughly cut. We're not looking for perfection. They're not going to be super pretty at this point, but it is enough for me to get them glued into place. And it's good also because now that I'm dry fitting them together, I can see that the angles that I have cut in there are just about spot on. I've gone ahead and sanded this flat so that I've got a nice gluing surface for this. So I'm just going to go ahead and glue them on. Alright, ain't the prettiest glue up in the world, but it'll do. It's nice and tight. I'm just going to let it dry, and then we'll shape it up. Alright, it's glued on. I think I may thin this out a little bit, but I'm just going to take some files and clean up this edge here and these edges here, and then I'll show you what I'm going to do with the inlay. I'm still debating whether I want to match the wire for the body and the headstock, or if I want to just match the one for the fretboard, which is the thinner wire. That way I'm not dremeling out a huge channel on the headstock, but we'll get there when we get there. Alright, we've got it roughly shaped down, and I've got a couple of the tuners on here just to show, but these fit nicely. We still got plenty of space. Reality, the thickness from the top and the bottom isn't going to play a whole lot of part where the tuning keys are sitting because they're already set in place. I realize that in this corner I'm going to have to carve out a little bit just to make sure that this ferrule sits flush. But very basically, I've got these two different wires here. This is what I was thinking about using for the body, and now that I'm looking at it, I'm thinking it might be too thick, so I may not use that one. But I've got this thinner one here. Very basically, I'm going to stick with that Imperial design, and I'm going to take an inlay around the edge. I realize there's not a whole lot of space here, so I'm not going to do anything there. I think I'm just going to cut it off very much in the same vein as my inlays for my fretboard are going to be. I'm going to do that square Imperial style design, and then just kind of go around this entire perimeter up until here, so they'll both be cut off in the same basic area. Alright, now that we got channel this far, I think it's sunk far enough. I'm not going to bore you with the rest of this, so I'm going to do the rest of this off camera, but you can see the idea that I'm going for, and then we'll sink it and apply some CA glue. So the real tedious part about the wire is making sure it's all bent in a way where it all sink in the pocket, because if it, like I said, this is an aluminum core wire, so if I don't sink it all the way, then it's going to pop out and you're going to end up shaving away the gold from this wire. So I've been using various different tools just to make sure that it's all seating inside of the pocket and nothing is popping close to the surface. I found that the best approach for doing this is to flood a little at a time, so that way you can make sure everything is sunk in and at the appropriate height. So if we're looking at this section here, so because this section is nice and sunk in, I'm just going to put a couple dots. And then we'll just kind of flood it. And now we got it sunk in. You notice there's a black line along here. That's from the burning of my Dremel bit. I was going to sand it all away, and then after I was looking at it, I kind of liked the hard line because it accentuates the gold, so I decided to leave it. We'll sand it back and we'll see how that turns out. And then we'll move on to the fretboard. Alright, well, we might as well crack on. Alright, so judging by the wire, I'm going to have to go just a little bit deeper, but I'm very happy with the result. What you didn't see on camera was that my camera decided to shut off in the middle of me doing this. And after scoring all my lines, I went through with this V-gouge to go straight across the line, and that actually helps the Dremel router run straighter on my design. I noticed I messed up a little bit here, so I'm going to clean that one out with a chisel. But these lines turned out much better all the way around the perimeter over here. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to deepen these channels just a little bit, and then I'm going to start moving on to the rest of them. And you see we'll bend the wire kind of like that. I'm going to go ahead and take these pliers and clean up these corners wire so they're still going to be somewhat curved just because of the nature of the wire. But that in turn will give me the good geometric shapes and the illusion that these are sharp corners. Which in this regard is all we really need. And then once everything is good, proper, and sunk, I'm just going to fill it with CA glue and then move on to the next one. Alright, so I've got a few of them flattened out and the rest dry in here. I found I had to do a few at a time so that I didn't get glue all over myself or mess up any of the other glue joints all over the fretboard. But it's turning out pretty much how I had expected, how I had hoped. So once the rest of those are dry, I'm going to flatten them out and give the fretboard a good sanding and then an oiling, and we'll see what it looks like from there. So now it's got started up here and going all the way down the neck. Well, we've got it sanded down. There are a couple spots here that didn't get sank completely, which I suppose is fine. It gives it kind of a rustic feel. So I may just run with that theme and make it so that I run some of the copper out in different spots just to make it look like it's a little aged. Now I plan on doing this around the body as well, so I think I'm going to take that same concept, make sure that the wire is at different heights so that I can then make it look a little more rustic, much like the fretboard is here. But we'll get to that when we get to that. I suppose at this point I should shape the heel, so that way we can worry about fretting. And now that we're at this point, I may add a cap to the bottom of this heel just to lower the depth a little bit, because I want it to line up with the body, but I think I'm going to wait until I get the body made to see where that falls, to see how much I have to add. But at this point, all we got to do is do some of the dreaded sanding. And some of this sanding. And maybe a little bit of this sanding. So it ain't Santana smooth, but we're close to there. So I'm going to leave it here for now. I still need to put the frets on this, but I still got quite a bit more sanding to do. I've done a good chunk of it, but I think I'll leave it here for now so that I can start working on the body. I don't want to get everything set in stone and final sanded before I get the body done, because I want the heel to transition into the body where it's going to lie with the body post. So I'm going to call it here for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Stay tuned.